Okay, so Murray, we're live with uh, impulsive um, conversation around portfolio themes and portfolio developments and projects. How are you feeling?
Yeah, great, man. It's going to be a fun little chat here, I think,
Yeah,
and good to talk about this subject. I think developing themes, developing projects and portfolios is probably one of the single most informative, or not informative, but it's one of the best ways people can progress in their photography.
yeah, I certainly agree. I think I've noticed the biggest evolution in my own um, work and I guess my own artistic voice and vision since I started to kind of amalgamate photographs into portfolios and into themes. And I'm currently um, sat with around, I think, four, maybe five of my own portfolios, a couple of which have really only
Very nice.
recently started to emerge and take shape. And I'm
Mm.
wondering how is your kind of, let's say, portfolio looking at the moment in terms of how many and yeah,
Um, I've got a couple things that are probably similar to you. They're in development, like very early stage ideas. Uh, and I like that. I like having multiple things going on at the same time because often I'll be overseas like I am now in South Africa, so I can explore some of the ideas that I've got out here versus in Scotland. So it sort of keeps me going between different projects, keeps my mind uh, continually exploring.
yeah,
And I probably wouldn't say I've got five. Um, I've got two, well, one that I've just recently wrapped up a few months ago, one that's fully ongoing, that's public, which is, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we
sure.
get into some of the slides. Um, and yeah, probably one more serious one in South Africa, which is very early stages.
Nice. I wonder how that kind of, I mean, a little, maybe a little bit off topic now, but it's still relevant. Um, I wonder how that approach of kind of getting away from Scotland and going to South Africa and then
Mm,
getting away from South Africa and coming back to the UK, back to Scotland, kind of helps in terms of, taking a step away perhaps. And it kind of sounds a little bit like
yeah,
maybe a bit of a yin yang approach. And perhaps that helps to then build the whole, if that makes sense.
taking a step back is super important. Letting the ideas marinate and sort of oscillating between the act of doing, of building the portfolio, and then thinking about, okay, well, actually having a bit of time for self-reflection,
Yeah.
like looking at the images when you've had a month away from working on something and saying, oh, actually, you know what? I really need to go back and visit in summer.
Hmm.
Like this portfolio has got loads of great winter images, autumn images, but there's no greens whatsoever.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I think that time away, there's lots of different versions of it. We do it when we try and take time away from social media or whatever it is, and you've got all these external influences that are potentially clouding the work you're making. Um, I think it's a great way to really hone your ideas and hone your vision of what you want to achieve.
Yeah, I'd completely agree. And actually, when making some notes this morning during my journaling practice, I actually put kind of, in the how section because the kind of style that we're working on here is a why and then how, which we'll go into in the slides in a
Yeah.
moment. But I just feel like it's a good time to talk about this now. One of my key points for how do we build themes and portfolios was to step outside of yourself and to observe work objectively, maybe to study it as if it was someone else's. So perhaps that idea of, heading to a new country gives you that perfect platform to look as though, that was
Yeah.
maybe the other version of Murray and it's not quite mine. It's, other side. So yeah, really, really interesting start to the conversation, I feel. And I think now probably leads me on to start sharing
Yeah.
my screen and to get into some of the the slides that I'd worked on. So first, I had why create themes and build portfolios. So there's a couple of my own photographs that I mean I impulsively edited into black and white just I think at the beginning of last week I was revisiting some old work and I just tried a mono conversion and looked at them and I thought, wow, they actually look really um, interesting and fairly unique. I really
Hmm.
like the look of them, and I figured that I'm in a position where I'm looking for new inspiration, and I'm kind of in a transition phase with my own work, having kind of
Yeah.
amalgamated it all into what's due to be my exhibition that's coming up in May at Plascal Innerweddw in North Wales. For anybody listening, if you're interested, then come along and I'll put all of the information down in the description. But that kind of draws a line under chapter one of my work. So I'm in this really interesting position where, new ideas are coming to me, and I figured that perhaps I'll work on
Yeah.
some black and white and figure out what that could be saying about me and about places that I visit. So
Hmm.
point number one, were you going to
Yeah.
say something there, Murray? Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say it's a when you have that sort of clear underlining of like the end of a project, it can often feel like you go into a bit of limbo for a
Yeah.
while. But it's amazing when these moments of like whatever it is, you're going back through your archive and you see an image and you're like, why did I not edit that?
Yeah.
Because that's brilliant. And
Yeah.
it's those
Yeah.
sparks that lead you to a new idea. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun.
And yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that insight. I think it's really important to be aware of those moments um, in our journeys that kind of like, the little spark of intuition, because I believe that
Yeah, exactly.
that's where the good, the gold comes from, is in the soul's calling, the heart's calling, whatever it's, calling us towards. Who knows, the path unfolds, and seems maybe as though the
Hmm.
pathway for me has unfolded just again over the past few weeks. So yeah, really interesting and exciting time for myself at the moment. So point number one as to why it can lead to a deeper self-awareness and understanding, perhaps bringing forth things from the unconscious into the conscious. Photography can be an act from our heart's intuition. So why are we drawn to certain subjects, places, weather conditions, and styles in our photographs? I wonder how that lands with you, Murray.
I think we've, in some ways, funnily enough, already touched on quite a few of those points just
Yeah,
through our own intuition of, we've been doing or working in this mode for a number of years ourselves. So I think we, in some ways, do this intuitively already. Um, but yeah, I think the point of sort of why create themes and build portfolios, it does make you more in tune with the photographs that you're taking. If you're going out into the landscape and just taking single images from random locations, it uh, for me anyway, it does lend to a little bit more of like a spray and pray type of approach.
yeah,
Where if I know that I'm working on something, whether that's you mentioned earlier before we started recording, working on seeing silence, which we're going to get onto. If you're approaching a particular theme, then you are going to be a lot more conscious when those moments present themselves to you.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, for me, kind of photography can be semi-subconscious, maybe even unconscious at times, in that we're
Yeah.
just maybe, yeah, drawn to photograph things. So to have a kind of bullet point, maybe list sometimes of what is it that I'm actually looking for, can really
Hmm.
help to steer us, because otherwise, I for one have felt sometimes like I'm just, spiraling and spinning and not really knowing what to look for. And this leads me on to something that I've kind of been working on recently in my own mind, about kind of the idea that creativity needs some discipline. It needs some structure. Maybe we think sometimes
Yeah.
of creativity being like, woo, I'm free flowing and, just able to do whatever, but actually it works better in the container, I believe. So to have those containers of, certain weather, for example, I like to photograph in the quiet, in the calm, for various reasons that I'll probably get into in a little while when I get onto the theme
Yeah.
of stillness. But to have those, I mean, sometimes containments and, you know, maybe a little bit more rigidity around what we're doing, it can really help us creatively.
Yeah. There's a I feel like it's a quote from somewhere, but I'm not sure who said it. I was editing a vlog from last May, and one of the things that I said was that inspiration comes to those who are working. And
Picasso,
I thought that was is that that's Picasso, right? There we go.
inspiration exists, but it has to find you working, something like that. Yeah?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I think I find that incredibly true. I mean, of course, there are those brilliant moments of inspiration that come out of the blue. You could be fast asleep half the time. You wake
Yeah.
up in the middle of the night and make a note or something. But
Yeah, yeah, definitely happens to me
yeah,
sometimes. Yeah. So I'm curious,
shower thoughts.
yeah, yeah, and driving as well. When I'm driving and the world's
Yeah,
whizzing
yeah.
by, it's kind of a nice place to come inwards. But yeah, like I'm curious, you know, about the kind of the self-awareness and understanding point here. How is that for you? Do you resonate with that side of things that, you know, you create something from, you know, the heart's intuition or from an impulse, and then do you feel like that leads you to a place of, you know, reflection and introspection? I know you mentioned process of introspection.
I'm trying.
Eh,
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, in what order this necessarily happens for me. Like, does the understanding and self-awareness come after I've built the portfolio, or
hmm,
is it something that I'm exploring and then that leads to the development of
right.
a project or a portfolio?
Interesting.
And I think sometimes it can work both ways, potentially.
Yeah.
That maybe there's different versions of both of those things that
Yeah.
happen throughout, you know. Photography for me is definitely very introspective.
Sure.
Um, and so, yeah, the feeling of deeper self-awareness certainly comes when I'm photographing woodland and trees.
Hmm.
And I think different landscapes bring on different emotions for me.
Hmm.
And, a very different understanding of self. Uh, when I'm
Yeah.
out in like a big mountain landscape, for
Hmm.
instance, I often get the feeling of like infinite time. You're looking at a landscape that's been often in Scotland for 3 billion years or something,
Yeah.
and you're sort of standing there as like a speck on the earth.
Yeah. Right.
And that's a very different feeling to being in a woodland where you're potentially interacting more with like a living organism that is
Mhm.
could be similar age to yourself. Um, so yeah, very, very, I would say the landscape that I'm photographing influences that to a large degree.
Yeah, really interesting point there because that's something we've talked about for our upcoming Scotland workshop, actually, isn't it? The weekend workshop that we've
Yeah,
got coming up in November is this idea of kind of what can different locations teach us about ourselves. So maybe again, building upon this idea of the yin yang, you know, we're going to head out into a vast open expanse where maybe we've got a view over the whole, over the entirety, and what
yeah,
thoughts, what feelings, what, you know, is happening on in the internal landscape during those moments versus then maybe coming down the valley and we find ourselves in a little enclosed pocket of woodland that, to me anyway, feels very much like a
hmm,
womb, particularly when the fog's enclosed
right,
and it's the silence of morning. It's very safe and it's very inward. And I feel very close to myself versus up on the mountain, like the mind just goes. And, you know, both have their
yeah,
beauty, both have their, you know, lessons, their wisdom. So yeah, that's something that I feel like we're both really looking forward to talking about and expanding upon
for sure.
in Scotland. Okay, so next point I came up with was building upon style. We can build a recognizable style or brand, perhaps, to our photographs, and therefore we might gain some artistic merit in the world of photography, necessary for anyone that might be trying to say something with their work. So,
Definitely. The last part of that I think is probably maybe the most crucial. creating work with meaning, I
Yeah.
think is probably at the core of why I work in projects and portfolios. Trying to say something with a single image is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
It can be done,
Yeah.
but often yeah, I don't know. Maybe I've got a handful, three or four images that say something in a single image. But
It's like,
building across a portfolio or a theme,
yeah.
you start to piece together things over the course of 6 to 12 images. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm less concerned with style or brand
Yeah.
personally, just because I tend to let the landscape inform me
Hmm.
as to like the best version of itself, if you like.
Okay. Yeah.
You showed a few black and white images down here. Those aren't necessarily maybe like the Brad Carr brand that lots of people know,
Yeah.
which is often, wonderful warming colors and nice light and all this. These are very still, quiet images that strip that color away and say something completely different.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts on style and brand?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely worked, particularly after probably 3 years into my journey, I particularly worked um, more in the understanding and use of light, although that kind of shooting into the light and using the light in that way emerged very early on in my journey.
Hmm.
And I particularly liked using that style of light because it told perhaps more of a philosophical story in terms of the light in the distance, maybe a bit more darkness in the foreground and that
Yeah.
journey. So in that sense, yeah, I was conscious of style and brand. I also then kind of evolved into a little bit more of a soft editing style where I, instead of adding clarity in, I took a little bit of clarity out,
Hmm.
and just gave them that softer, perhaps more gentle look, which I felt, kind of observing myself through the whole journey that was kind of my nature, my demeanor as well. So I tried to make my photographs reflect that part of myself, which I think is very important in
Yeah.
photography, to say something about me at the same time as saying something about, a place.
Hmm.
And then, weaving that all in together into the imagery. But like you said, these are kind of maybe against my style, my brand, and maybe what people have come to recognize as one of my photographs. I mean, it's great when, I've put photographs up on social media before, and then I've had a message where people have said, "I knew this was yours before I even looked
Yeah.
at the name." So that, I mean, that's great because I feel like as artists, that's a wonderful feeling to know that your work is kind of recognizable. But I feel like I've kind of evolved again now into that style or brand being more about the kind of compositions rather than the
Yeah.
actual visible editing look.
Yeah.
um, and maybe in the kind of mystery behind a photograph, which these two, although they're black and white and they're focused a lot more on texture, and perhaps the stillness element, um, I've lost my train of thought now.
I think it's just a different form of self-expression, isn't it? It's using different tools that are available to us as photographers, as editors, as potentially, with print, with all different things at our disposal.
Yeah,
Each of those tools is something that we can utilize to say something.
yeah,
So it's really interesting to see you exploring like a different avenue to try and express uh, whether that's a part of yourself or, in this case, you mentioned texture,
yeah,
where you were doing negative clarity before, trying to create something soft. This is like almost positive clarity,
yeah,
trying to emphasize that, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting.
So it's also for me about kind of allowing these themes and styles and techniques and whatever to kind of emerge as the journey unfolds. I put a little bit later a quote from Rumi, which is, "As you walk along the way appears." So it's kind of this
Hmm.
approach that these things
Yeah.
emerge
Hmm.
as we're going along, and to,
There's
you know, go on.
another version of that, which is I know where oh, I know where I'm going, but I don't know how I'm going to get there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I love that. I'm going here, right here, and that's the key, yeah, to be here. Um, yeah, so I feel like
Sorry, it might be the other way around. I don't know where I'm going, but I know how I'm going to get there.
right,
One of those two.
yeah, we'll look at that afterwards. Yeah, so I feel like that's enough said on that point. Have you got anything else you might like to add to that?
No, carry on, carry on.
Okay. There we go. So it helps us to organize our photographs, which can be great for anyone that is potentially looking to create something from them, such as a book, a print collection, an exhibition, a magazine submission. Curators, editors, buyers, etc., will be looking for deeper meaning and not just a handful of pretty photographs. Any thoughts
I
on
don't
that,
know if I've
Murray?
got much more. I don't know if I've got much more to add to that. That's just good advice, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just going to add something on that because something's just come to me now where I wrote a little bit of um, something on Threads and also on Substack earlier, which was about the idea that, oh, let me just see if I can bring it up because I can read the actual Substack. Let's see. I can read the full post. Um, So there we go. It is kind of arrogant as an artist to believe that you can just make it in this modern world because your art is good. There are millions of artists making good work. The ones that will find success are the ones that find ways to open doors. It simply isn't enough to just make good art. You have to become an exceptional communicator and learn to promote yourself with words. Average work, high self-confidence, exceptional communication skills is much greater than exceptional work, low self-confidence, average communication skills. I have found some artistic success in recent times, and I don't believe that it is because of the quality of my work. It is, I believe, mostly down to my willingness and ability to communicate with other people, telling them who I am and what I do in an engaging and interesting way.
That is definitely a reality of of the modern world. Yeah,
Sure.
I can relate fully with that. Um, how you tell the story
Right.
is in some ways as important as the story itself.
Absolutely. And that again goes down to kind of books, and you're going to share some of your own book. Would you
Yeah,
call it a book or a zine?
I call it a book because
Yeah.
it's just too long for a zine. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Zine inspired book length.
Yeah. I caused myself a bit of confusion as well when I produced mine, and I kind of trod the threshold between the two. But I
Yeah.
appreciate your clarity of no, it's a book. Great. Uh, okay. So yeah, that's enough said on that one. You look more professional and will most likely gain more respect, not only from people in the outside world, but also from yourself as you begin to take your work more seriously. It builds confidence to see your photographs curated into something meaningful. It becomes a body of work that tells a story of you, of place, of nature, of the human experience, perhaps. Any
It's a
thoughts on
great
that?
point. And I was recording a podcast the other week with someone, which I don't think will be out by the time we put this online. But they had some lovely comments about the way that it seemed like I had organized everything and that I had all of these different facets to my photography business going on, whether that's books, having a good amount of projects up, work from different places that is curated in a meaningful way.
Yeah,
Um, and the fact that somebody else noticed that and noticed that I had made the effort
yeah,
to present myself in a professional way definitely goes a long way.
yeah.
Yeah.
I bet that was music to your ears to receive that
Yeah,
comment.
it was.
Yeah. So what about your journey to get to that point then? I mean, I'm just thinking with the idea of the viewers that will probably be watching this. Maybe they won't be maybe at this at the stage that you're at, that I'm at, perhaps with their work. Hence why they'll be
Yeah.
watching this, trying to learn. So let's try and put ourselves into their shoes for a moment. And let's say,
Hmm.
where were you with presentation? I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago? You've been at it for 10 years, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, photography, probably more like 15.
Yeah,
Professional since about 2020, 2021.
cool.
But I've always worked in projects, even when I was doing architecture, obviously.
Yeah,
That it sort of comes out of that a little bit for me, or that's why it makes sense to my brain anyway, I think. Um, in terms of like, if you're just getting started and building something from scratch, the most important part of it is, I would say, that it has to come naturally. Um, Forcing something into a theme or forcing a
mm,
portfolio
yeah,
is going to actually, in the long run, probably net negative for you.
yeah,
And so, yeah, exploring something in a theme or a portfolio, it's got to be a natural curiosity, and that'll result in it becoming the best version of itself. And then, honestly, in photography, I think people underplay how long these things take.
yeah, right.
Projects can take, many years to fully develop. So give yourself the time, and uh, it'll it'll come.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, I guess most, let's say, successful portfolio so far, yeah, just kind of happened and just shaped itself. And that was my own zine book, A Year Amongst Trees.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just came from following my own natural curiosity that year of, stepping foot into a woodland,
Hmm.
and just kind of happened. One of those things where, when I write poetry, sometimes the words just come, they just happen, and then I'm like, where did that come from? You know,
It's it
beyond.
is a difficult thing to have the confidence though to pursue it in the first place. Like you need to give yourself the artistic permission
Yeah,
to
right.
go and actually do the thing that's been nagging you in the back of your mind for the last 6 months,
Yeah, that's
which
really, really
yeah.
great point. Sorry, were you finished then?
No, no, go ahead.
Um, I've been kind of working on something like I don't know if it's going to be just an article or perhaps evolve into something else around, you know, kind of amalgamating all of my thoughts about the creative process. And one of the key
Yeah.
points that came up for me was actually the courage that it takes to
Yeah.
be creative and to pursue some of these thoughts and these ideas, you know, to do things a little bit differently and maybe to find your own way and to try and amalgamate things into a portfolio. It takes tremendous
Hmm.
courage. And I think that that's something that is often overlooked in the world of photography when we're so focused on, camera gear and settings. But what actually does it take as a person, not only to go and pursue our curiosities, but then to share it with the world,
Yeah.
to put it out there and give images names. That's kind of like a level of vulnerability that perhaps some people might get frozen by. So for me,
Yeah.
as much of the creative process, as much of the journey is about the overcoming of self through it, and self-doubt and fear and all of these limitations and worries about what the world might say. So I
Yeah.
think I think the key, yeah, the key is courage to experiment and explore and to throw things together in a way that, I don't know, maybe hasn't been done before.
And if anyone's struggling with that particular point, um, maybe it is something where you if you're not doing this professionally, you just build a portfolio for yourself. And it doesn't have to be something that you share photographs with the world. I think
Yeah.
that's something that potentially people think, oh, I have to go and share these. I have to go and
Yeah.
put them on social media or wherever. The reality is you don't. And there's going to be a lot of projects that you start and don't actually go anywhere as well. And so I think having what's the right word? Having the patience to see something through before you start sharing it more widely is, for me anyway, that's been one of the keys to how I then unlock the confidence to share it. Because
Yeah.
I've given it enough time to become something that's meaningful to me. So then I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah, now I'm people need to see this now.
Yeah, right. Would you then go, like, would your process then, or has it been to like share it with a small group, maybe with members of your family, people you trust first before then putting it out there?
It depends on I've done it a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Often it depends on the project, which is it's not a clear answer for people listening or
Yeah.
watching. But yeah, I do have a group of friends and a group of fellow professionals that I share stuff with.
Yeah.
You're one of them, of course, Brad.
Yeah. Great.
And yeah, seeking feedback and critique is also one of the key ways in which people can grow as photographers.
Yeah.
Um, a drop in there that we are doing a group image critique, so we can have a few people join for a session to share some images and get some critique from me and you. And I think if anyone is keen, then that is definitely something to consider as like a stepping stone towards creating a bigger portfolio or bigger, yeah, body of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. I'm definitely looking forward to delivering that critique session with you, Murray. What was the date that we penciled in? Can you remember?
I believe it is the 22nd of May, and
Yeah.
it was 7 p.m. GMT. Um,
Yeah.
but
And
yeah,
you've,
you can
yeah.
check the details in the description and all that good stuff.
Yeah, let's go. Okay. Yeah, great, great stuff. This is shaping up to be a really interesting conversation, and I hope that the viewers are getting something valuable from this. If you are, then we'd love to hear from you. And yeah, feel free to drop down in the comments and offer some thoughts. I think me and Murray both love feedback, both positive and negative. So if you have got any criticisms, then please feel free. I certainly, grow from criticism much more than I grow from praise. But praise is welcome, of course, as well. So yeah, okay. So we've given the whys, or some whys. I'm sure there's plenty more. Um, Now we're getting on to the hows. So how to create themes and build portfolios. So point number one that I came up with was to relentlessly follow your intuition. And there's a quote from Joseph Campbell there. I say, follow your bliss and don't be afraid, and doors will open where you didn't know they were going to be. And yeah, our hearts know the way towards light, towards photographs, and towards the truth. Of course, there is the absolute truth, but then I believe that there is also a personal truth and a personal calling for all of us as people and as artists. Where the gold is, where the good stuff is, the photographs, the paintings, anything that can teach us about ourselves and offer insights into who we are. I mean, for me, photography is a self-reflective process, and following that intuition leads me generally to some wisdom, some knowledge of the world outside, but also the world within. How do you feel about this quote and those thoughts, Murray?
Completely agree with everything. I would just say that it's probably something that's easier said than done.
Yeah,
Being actually in tune enough with yourself. I think in order to follow your intuition, at some level, you have to know who you are as a person,
yeah,
as a human being. And so I think a lot of people struggle with this point because they don't actually know what they're interested in.
yeah, right.
And it is a little bit of a chicken and egg thing
Mm,
because you've got to follow your curiosity to then go and try things out,
yeah,
which then leads you, oh, actually, I really didn't like photographing mountains. I'm going to go and try photographing wildlife, whatever it
yeah,
is.
right. I'll just
So
interject there just a moment, and also then if you're going to ask yourself that, then perhaps the question why comes into play as well. Do you think if
yeah,
you don't like doing this, why? And
yes,
that's I believe a way to steer us onto that path of maybe self-knowledge and
yeah,
self-understanding and also
yeah.
understanding of the art. Were you going to say some more then? Sorry.
No, I agree with that. It's a reflection process of, why didn't I like that? Or was there a reason, something that I could have changed, which would have made me enjoy it more?
Yeah.
Um, maybe you don't like hiking 6 days on the trot, and the sort of like hygiene aspect of not being able to take a shower was just really not enjoyable for you.
Right.
So, a day hike might be really fun, and you just haven't tried that yet.
Right. Yeah, I really value your input on that point, and that's something that I mean. being an incredibly introspective person throughout most of my life and having a level, I believe, of self-knowledge and understanding, and I guess
Yeah,
perhaps being
self-awareness, right?
self-awareness, yeah, and
Yeah.
perhaps being given some freedom to explore myself and my own interests. I mean, with some limitations, it took me until my mid-20s to really embark upon that process. But that's something I guess I just take for granted is that level of, intuition and being able to follow that. So I
Mm.
wonder, I mean, from your point of view, are there any ways in which you believe if there's a viewer that maybe struggles with that, that you believe that they could maybe develop that side of things?
I mean, for me, it always came from, you know, the camera itself was the tool
Yeah.
to explore things, and it doesn't have to be a really complicated process. It is literally just as easy as, make yourself go on a walk out in nature. It
Hmm.
could be from your front door
Yeah.
and see what catches your attention on that walk. It could be literally without the camera, and you're just going on that walk and making mental notes of,
Yeah.
oh, the light that was catching those beech trees in spring and the way that the beech tree was turning translucent and I could see the veins of the leaf coming through. Something that caught your attention. And then you'll naturally start building up this sort of inventory of things that interest you.
Yeah.
And that leads you places, and it sort of snowballs really
Yeah,
quickly.
I'd just like to interject there because I think using the old scaffolding technique that we discussed not too long ago,
Yeah.
I've got something to add in there about kind of my own journey towards, self-awareness, self-understanding, particularly over the past 8 years, has been my journaling practice, and it's been actually recording my
Yeah.
thoughts, so they're not just a thought anymore. There's something in the physical world, and I think in terms of building upon that level of self understanding, the journaling
Hmm.
practice for me has been, well, I mean, transformational and yeah, completely life changing because not only then are they thoughts, but you can look back at them and, return to perhaps past versions of who we are because we're ever changing, always evolving. I think it's important to be able to look back and to see our past thoughts and past curiosities and,
And you've
see.
got a record of your development, and you can actually see how far you've come. Maybe there's moments where you think, I'm still just doing the same old stuff over and over again.
Right.
But actually, when you then go back and look, it's like, oh, wow, I have actually progressed quite a lot.
Yeah, so absolutely, it's great for building confidence too,
Yeah.
having that kind of record.
I love that point as well about bringing in outside practices or things that aren't necessarily to do with photography.
Yeah,
I think that's quite important, having other interests that
yeah.
can feed into things.
I feel like we can become so obsessed with just photography and then kind of limiting everything that's outside that I actually believe is way more important than the
Mm.
photography because it's who we are as people and it's developing all these many parts of ourselves that we can then amalgamate into the whole and, channel into
I am
photography.
only a photographer, Brad.
Yeah. I only photograph trees. That's it. Yeah.
Only.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. There's a lovely Ansel Adams quote, isn't there? It might even be in the presentation afterwards about, photography being a result of the people we've loved, the books we've
Yeah.
read, the movies we've watched, and that always seems to find its way into my conversations somewhere. It's one that's
Hmm.
really stuck in here. Somebody asked me not long ago about my inspirations, actually, and they were really surprised when I told them that there weren't that many photographers in there. I'm personally not somebody who will sit and obsessively study photographers, but I will, obsess over musicians and read their bios and find out, what their lyrics mean. And, I believe that all of that, finds its way into
Yeah.
how we see the world. Everything that we experience shapes the way that we see, and photography is just a record of that, really, isn't it? And how we choose to see too, right?
Hmm.
Okay. Feel like we've said enough on that one. So reflect upon photographs. So you can ask questions of yourself. And again, this might be mentally, where you mentally ask these questions. It might be, as my approach is, to journal about some of these things. So, why this location? Why did I feel drawn to use the light like that? What am I trying to communicate beyond a time or place? What is important to me outside of the art of photography, and how can I bring those into my work? So,
We we
yeah,
talked about pretty much all of those points
pretty
there
much.
in the last 10 minutes. Yeah, we got ahead
Yeah.
of ourselves there.
Yeah, there was a little bit about the, time or place. I feel
Yeah,
like for me, the themes and the portfolios come beyond taking a photo of a thing or a location,
yeah,
and making a photograph about something, about an emotion, about
yeah.
a feeling, about the trees, about a lake.
That's one of the key points that I always try to get workshop clients to the point where they're making photographs about something rather than of something, which is yeah, that it's a big jump to take, I think. But
Yeah,
once you get there, there's like a light bulb moment that happens for a lot of people.
yeah. What's your kind of approach on a workshop to kind of spark some of those deeper thoughts with clients?
Um, it is a lot of the times about teasing out their own curiosities. I had somebody who wanted to photograph the spirit of the woodland, and so really trying to dig into ways in which they could potentially abstract their photographs to capture that spirit and the
Mm,
feeling.
mm.
We were out on a really windy morning, and so we were sort of in this like cacophony of noise and sound and rustling leaves. And so we started to make long exposure ICM photographs.
Yeah.
And there was like, as soon as we started doing that, there was this immediate mood switch in my client that was like, oh
Wow.
my God, this is exactly what I wanted to do.
Wow. Really interesting. Yeah. It's funny that because a lady on one of my workshops asked how she photographs a spirit within the tree,
Right.
which I couldn't answer in the moment too accurately, but it sparked a whole realm of thought. Um,
Yeah.
and then I went away and, wrote a whole blog post about spirituality and, all kinds of things, really. So,
Yeah. I
I
might
mean,
have a different answer if you asked me today or if you asked
yeah,
me in
right.
3 months' time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that concept of kind of like we're learning as well, aren't we, when we're out
Yeah.
with people in the landscape. It's not a I'm the teacher, you're the student, kind of approach. It's about constantly.
Yeah. Finding everyone's unique way of expressing themselves.
Right.
It's really difficult as a well, I don't do it explicitly, don't do it. It's, tell people this is how you should photograph
Yeah,
because, that's just it's not gonna get them to the best version of themselves.
right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, I'm working on an essay at the moment around similar concept that I was told by somebody, I won't name any names. I was told by somebody that another leader would tell people off, for doing it the wrong way or for being an artist in the wrong way, let's say, which I
yeah,
find, well, kind of hilarious, but then also kind of just bewildering to think that somebody would kind of teach or guide in that way where it's maybe all about doing it my way and this is the only way. But what is it? Many roads that lead to Rome, is that the saying or something like that?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, anyway, I think we're getting off topic a little bit. So back on the presentation now. So study a location and get to know it intimately. The more we spend time in familiar places, the more we might get to know ourselves along the way. It is for me about going deeper into subjects and the self. We exhaust the immediately obvious composition and then we must experiment and think outside of the box to create something unique and interesting. This is when we can learn about ourselves, our blocks, limitations, and perhaps even fears.
Yeah, mate, great point that, and it's something that I regularly try to do myself by having like deeply immersive experiences. And
Sure.
that's one of the reasons that I absolutely love doing long distance hiking and camping
Yeah.
is like there's no better way to get to know a place than to spend a night on a tent somewhere.
Yeah.
Every creak and howl of wind in the night. you're learning something.
Yeah.
And both about the place and about yourself. You know,
Yeah.
you mentioned fears, and I think a lot of
Right.
people have that when they go out to places for the first time, especially if they spend the night somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I
Not
think,
just literal. Sorry. Yeah. Go on.
no, I was going to talk about, one of my favorite places is the Isle of Harris, and I've gone and spent months and months on the island, and every single time I go back, I find something new. It's like the deeper you go somewhere and the
Yeah.
more you get to know it, you
Yeah.
actually realize that there's even more that you can uncover. There's more that you didn't know about.
Yeah. And does that kind of change as you get away and get different perspectives of different places? So, for example, now you're in South Africa, I'm sure
Mhm.
that's going to evolve your vision so that when you come back to the UK, you're probably seeing in a different way again, right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about like really different things out here. Like, I'm going to photograph wildlife in a couple days,
Yeah.
and that's a totally different. Uh, I've got a whole different consideration towards how I have to act in the landscape. What kind of cues I'm looking for from the animals and how you actually interact with them
Mm.
versus, down on the beach or in the mountains. It's just a totally different thing. And bringing those things uh, to each other
Yeah.
is really interesting.
Yeah. And I really like that point of the fears. You know, you talked about literal fears of
Mm.
things, dark beasts out in the wilderness. But then we
Yeah,
touched upon the maybe the inner fears of the fear of, self-expression, which can often be a limitation in photography as well. And, we touched upon those a little bit before, but I feel like those fears are, probably more instrumental and to face more important, I
mm.
believe, to face in the role of art and photography and self-expression and
Yeah. Well, often I find that those sort of like external fears that are not real are sort of a reflection or a manifestation of those internal fears.
yeah,
So you might be imagining something happening or coming out of the night and getting you in your tent or whatever it is.
yeah,
But that's just a reflection of whatever is going on in your life at the time.
yeah. I love that. Wow, we're getting deep into some psychology right now, aren't we? I guess this is a bit of a sign of the things to come during the Scotland trip in November, which I'm really looking forward to because I feel like the conversation side of things is kind of equally as important as the actually
Yeah.
taking photographs. So to kind of be getting into some of this stuff now fills me with a lot of excitement as to the places we might go. Firstly,
Yeah,
over a couple
exactly.
of days, but then also with 2026 in mind when we're looking at an intensive 5 day
Yeah.
workshop. It's going to be really interesting. For me, on workshops, it's as much about what we're covering away from location through the journey, from place to place and the
Mhm.
places that conversations go. It gives that perfect kind of like the empty space in to put it in a visual perspective. The empty space around the photograph is equally as important as the or around the subject is equally as important. And yeah, that space on workshops is going to be important for growth as well, I think. And this is where we can perhaps discuss some of these other topics, such as blocks, limitations, fears, and perhaps even shine lights on how to overcome them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
So yeah, next, how to find sources of inspiration, to look around often outside of the world of photography. What captivates you? What are you naturally drawn to and curious about? What types of people do you tend to gravitate towards or avoid? Why are you drawn to them? What is it about them that inspires you? The music we listen to, the movies we watch, the people we spend our time with can all lead us to learning something about ourselves. These all transfer into what or how we create, or so I believe. Are you open to everything being your guide and teacher? Again, I think we have covered, well, exactly this a
Mhm.
little while ago, so we won't go into that, but maybe just a reminder for viewers there.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, maybe these questions will prompt you to sit with a journal yourself and do a little bit of reflecting. There you go. And finally, in this section, lose yourself in the doing. It is important along this journey to not force things, allow them to unravel naturally. Your job, like any great artist, is simply to remain open and curious about yourself. Oh, yourself, about yourself, your subject, and the world. As you start to walk along the way appears. Again, something that we have already covered. I wonder, has anything else come to mind in that, Murray? Or
Um, I think I wanted to maybe give some just like very practical tips.
go on?
I think we've covered a lot about the sort of introspective and philosophical approaches that we use to create themes and build portfolios.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say it might be the case that a lot of these things or sources of inspiration you've already made photographs of. They might be sitting in your
Hmm.
Lightroom catalog as we speak.
Yeah.
And so there's probably like two different modes about how you actually physically go and create themes and build portfolios. One of them is you've already done the work. You now need to do the work of curating
Right.
those photographs into a body that clearly expresses whatever idea it is. The other version, which is potentially more of what we're talking about today, is work that you haven't made yet. And how do you actually go about finding those themes before you make the work itself?
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's a value in both approaches, and I think for a lot of people, potentially, it's a really good exercise to just go and look through your Lightroom catalog
Yeah.
and try and build a theme of 10 images around one particular idea. That
Yeah.
could be winter trees. It could be, pick something
Yeah.
really simple to start, and then you can build from there.
Yeah. Right. It could be something, like you say, literal, something physical. Yeah. And
Mhm.
then perhaps maybe some of the other deeper themes and ideas can come in a little bit
Yeah.
down the line. But I think you're right in that it's important to start simple. In doing this kind of thing so that it's not a kind of overwhelming process of, oh my God, I need to sit and journal and think about who I am and why I'm here on this planet.
Yeah.
But
Start to walk on the way, right?
yeah, yeah. And keep it simple with 10 images. Um, great point there, Murray. And like you said, a lot of the work has already been done. And this portfolio that I'm about to share next, photographing stillness, or Seeking Stillness as it's titled. A lot of these photographs were already in my portfolio. It just took for me to kind of look back over them
Mm.
and take some time away. Like, this idea came to me back in probably, I think it was December or maybe January, probably January, when I went to the national park, to Erari or Snowdonia, and actually created this photograph, which was the first photograph in a while, but it had again a theme of stillness. Even perhaps you might even see a little bit of motion, which is kind of interesting and ironic. But that just sparked a little bit of shift inside of my mind that, oh, it just became kind of literal and obvious that I already had probably 10, 15 photographs that all followed the same kind of theme. So I went back to an essay that I wrote called Seeking Stillness of the same name, which inspired the name of the then portfolio, and grabbed a few lines here. It is the stillness that I seek, the kind that can only be found out here in these wild places. When I am out here, my spirit feels a certain peace, and the voice that I seek is free to speak. So I went back and grabbed again what had already been done. I'd already done the work, like you said, Murray,
Hmm.
and I'd already done the work with many of the photographs. It just took for me to perhaps recognize some similarities, not only in their visual appeal, and look, you'll see they're all of similar kind of, even down to the colors, the color tones, maybe even composition. There's some negative space, empty space with them. But then for me, also being this introspective and kind of emotion-led person, which I completely understand that not everybody is that way. This is just my way of using photography and using the art. Also in here are themes of, healing and catharsis and stillness, and listening, hearing, and
Mm.
engaging with senses, and you know kind of understanding the landscape using all of these senses that are within.
My reading of these images, having, knowing your story and having interviewed you, and having been on your podcast and spent time with you and all of this, uh, is sort of like I see a transformation from potentially your first body of work, to do with finding light, and that being sort of like a transformational period in your being. And now you're sort of shifting into, well, I've found who I am,
Yeah,
and now I'm trying to live in that being and live in that person who I've become.
yeah,
Would,
yeah.
would that reading be, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
No, you're absolutely right. It's yeah, really. I mean, yeah, I value how you've seen that actually, and interpreted that, because it is very much like I guess even more of a refinement, perhaps.
Hmm.
Where yeah, I think those themes were in enrolled in that portfolio of Finding Light, but I feel like these are even more refined and curated into, you know, what I'm saying, and what I am. Like you said, the journey
Yeah,
to find who I am. Now, perhaps this is more so who I am. But then also at the same time, there's a part of me that's like, but I'm not always completely calm and mellow and still. There is the opposite as well. So this is
yeah,
perhaps one side of me, and I
yeah,
have thought maybe about the idea of photographing the opposite too, which might be more chaos, more, loud, and
energy.
more energy and movement.
Yeah,
So who knows where it's going to go? But this is a great example now, I believe, of where conversation is important in guiding um, development as artists and as photographers.
hmm,
It's to get that mirror looking outside in, to offer little insights that can spark a different thought and maybe
yeah.
guide someone somewhere. So thank you very much,
No,
Murray.
yeah. It's just interesting because it's a lot of similar. Uh, I see a lot of similarities in my own process and my own bodies of work. Obviously photographing in very different aesthetics and locations,
Yeah.
but exploring similar themes. Yeah,
Yeah. Hence why I feel like we've made a very wise decision to team up on offering something
yeah,
to
yeah.
people in the
There's
future,
an alignment for sure.
or a series of things in the future, I feel more so.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a few more photographs just to kind of showcase a little bit more of this portfolio and some of the ideas. Um,
Is this the same woodland that you featured the trees, the first two images?
yeah, these are actually all from the same place.
Yeah, okay. I can see
So
that.
yeah, so just going back through now, you can see these are actually the same trees, just
Yeah.
many different angles of the same trees, different angles, and the same light. And then also, you mentioned a little bit earlier about kind of photographing wider and also intimate scenes. This is also an example
Mm,
of that, where I'm looking at the whole and then I'm looking at parts. So, I mean, within this, there's perhaps insights into for the viewer to perhaps just go and pick as simple as a copse of trees somewhere.
yeah.
And this is an approach I use on my workshops, is to pick just a simple subject from the whole and to go and experiment with some different angles,
Hmm.
different lights. Again, we've got flat light, we've got backlight, and how different that can make the same trees look. Because this is just
Exactly.
such a great process to embark upon in your photography, to again to give yourself some containments and to refine yourself and to see what might be possible within that containment. Again, the role of curiosity here is key. What might happen if I just take a few steps that way? What might happen if I put the light the other side? What might happen if I look up, look down? Looking
Yeah.
down, in a moment you can see into the lake with a telephoto rather than a mid-length lens, can really
Hmm.
simplify the landscape, but also add complexity, right? It's kind of paradoxical that you're simplifying it with a long lens, but then creating a perhaps more complex image as well that your mind is kind of working out because of the elimination of sky.
Yeah,
You know, your mind kind of thinks, well, what am I looking at right now? It kind of abstracts it a little bit.
definitely a good point. That sort of artificial, uh, what's the right word? Containment, I think was the word you used, but yeah, creating the artificial conditions
Yeah,
in which you can be curious about something.
yeah,
I do the same thing, especially on woodland workshops. We'll find a particular copse of trees, and I'll say, okay, we're going to photograph from outside the woodland, then we're going to go photograph inside the woodland and contrast and compare both the images you make, but also how you felt while you were making the images, etc.
yeah. I've just, as you're talking
Those
now,
little creative exercises are
yeah,
really useful. Yeah.
yeah. And as you're talking right now, I'm just really, my mind just went straight to the workshop that we're planning and a little exercise that we might do where we task everybody with photographing the same things and maybe create, maybe we set like an A, B, C, D, four different subjects, projects, and then everybody goes around a bit like a circuit that you're doing in PE or something.
Yeah.
And then to get a,
Everyone's got to go photograph a Scots pine.
yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And just to get six different or it's six, isn't it? Six different takes on certain subjects because
yeah,
everybody would come up with something completely unique, I'm sure.
yeah.
So
That might be interesting for sure.
yeah. So I think that now, there we go. That's probably the last of my bit of the
Cool.
presentation there. So there we go. Any thoughts on the further thoughts on the portfolio there, Murray? Any questions that might have come
No,
to
I thought it
mind?
was a great way to lead into the images. Just the conversation's been great, and keen to contrast that with a few of my
Yeah,
photographs and give people sort of the alternative perspective, I suppose.
yeah, perfect. So I'm going to stop sharing now and open that up for you to share your screen now.
Cool. Not quite as in depth of a presentation. Hopefully, keep things short-ish here. And yeah, I often work in these long-term projects, and in this particular instance with Machair, I ended up with a portfolio of about 50 images or so. And essentially, what that meant was I came up against sort of a block of how was I going to present this work. It was a portfolio having spent so many months on the Isle of Harris that I felt really deeply about. Um, and so I knew I wanted to share it, but the form in which I wanted to share it was something that I struggled with for quite a while. So I actually sat on this work for, I don't know, 6 months or something before I finally came to the conclusion that it needed to be in a zine book, some sort of hybrid. It's a soft cover book of about, I think it's 64 pages, but there's 50 images in it. So basically, too much to be a print collection, too much to be an exhibition, and online, like an online gallery, didn't feel like doing this work justice
Hmm.
and sort of giving, you know, the time commitment that I had spent out there. It's sort of, uh, yeah, it just didn't feel right. So the form of choosing to go with a book led me very much to working in this way of image pairings and how do the sort of facing pages of that book interact with each other.
Hmm.
And so one of the ways in which I'm trying to tell the story of this location is through those interactions. Um, and essentially, the way I laid the book out was I wanted it to feel like the tide was coming in and out, and there was this sort of like constant wave action rushing over you as you sort of got, you flick through this series of images down on the coast. Um, and so the book itself became a vehicle for telling the story rather than just the images themselves. So I think that's another, or one of the key points for me, I would say, is considering the full holistic process
Hmm.
is really key. Um, we can have great ideas, we can go and execute them technically perfectly, and then we can present them in any number of different ways. But I think considering that full process and really marrying every single step of the way up is going to result in something that's just all the better for it.
Yeah.
And then this was an example of an image that I ended up having as one of, I think, four solo photographs that didn't have a facing or an image pair, and utilizing the square format as a way of indicating that difference as well.
Mm.
So there's like a lot of different tools at our disposal.
Yeah. So did
That
you
really,
crop? Sorry. Yeah. That
no,
really.
go ahead.
Did you crop this into a square to suit the book, or did you crop this into a square because it worked as a square?
In this instance, it worked as a square.
Yeah.
Um, I generally always try to make the image the best version of itself, and then work on the project as sort of like a secondary function of that.
Sure.
So there's a whole bunch of images that didn't make the book simply because the body of work was stronger with a different version or a different collection. So there's probably, I don't know, 20 or so images that had to get cut.
Yeah.
But they're still great images, and they potentially work on their own. They just
Yeah.
didn't work towards the specific story that I was telling
And what were your
about the Isle of
parameters?
Harris.
What were your parameters to cut those to keep them out? Like,
Honestly, it's a really difficult process to describe.
yeah.
Um, One of the things that I love to do is I'll go and get postcard prints of like
Yeah.
all the images in a particular project, and I'll lay them out on a table. And there's often like really obvious key images that I know, oh, that pair really works well together. And then there's some floaters, and those images, maybe they get worked in somewhere, but maybe they don't.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of iterations that I go through before I land on like a final grouping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, there was something you had sparked an idea there, but I forgot
Oh,
now.
sorry.
The thought disappeared.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, these images, the other thing that I did was this is actually one of the first times these images will be online. So these were only available in the book.
Right.
Um, so there was sort of a narrative there of it being like a really sacred space
Mm.
for me. And
What being a
you talking
sacred
about
space? The landscape
the
or
the actual Isle of Harris.
yeah.
And so limiting it to being only in book format on printed paper
Mm.
was something that was sort of quite important to me to reflect the sort of reverence that I hold this place in.
Mm.
And that ended up being the cover. So for anyone interested, Machair is the name of the soil that the Isle of Harris is made up of. And you only find it in this part of Scotland and Northern Ireland. And it's actually seashells that get crushed by the tide. Hence the cover.
Yeah. Are there things, with you mentioned reverence, like
Mm.
are there things, that you're trying to say beyond the immediacy? Well, I mean, I'm sure there are, and I'm just curious as to maybe hearing some of those things whilst we're in conversation now. What's important to you about this project, and what are you trying to communicate beyond, the time and place that we mentioned before?
It's for me, I'm often out in the landscape and I try and find sort of like the untold story of a place. And I place a lot more importance on the landscape's story than potentially my own personal story.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was really this particular project. Uh, there are other projects that I've done that have been more sort of a story of self. But for Machair in particular, it was something that I felt like the Isle of Harris, in particular Luscantire, is like almost a honeypot location at this point. So the philosophical point that I was trying to bring to this was like there's so much more to these beautiful places that we can find if we all look closer and like actually take the time to slow down and spend time in these places and get to know them a bit better.
Yeah.
Um, so that was kind of like, I guess, the philosophy behind how I actually went about making the project.
Mm.
But the story itself is of like the hidden landscape right in front of us.
Yeah. And was there a process to get to that point of, what story am I trying to tell here? Was there, you know, reflective
Months and
practice?
months, months
Yeah.
and months on location.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there was it took a lot of a fair amount of time on the Isle of Harris to actually learn about this because it seemed like nobody was really talking about it in the first place. Um, so I think people are potentially slightly more aware of it now.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, it was something that I, with all the other photographers that I had visited the Isle of Harris with or met on the Isle of Harris, it was never something that I'd heard anyone talk about before.
Yeah. So
Um,
there's a desire to kind of raise some awareness then for,
yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
these places and locations. Really interested in the crossover between, the my perhaps approach of awareness of self and, place and your awareness of the place and, the story but behind the place as well.
Yeah, I think there's always a why recently anyway, there's definitely been more of a like environmental or conservation undertone to a lot of my work, which is something that I don't necessarily like. I don't put it right in front of you, and that's not like
Yeah.
the key messaging necessarily. It's
Mm,
something that I want, like, if you're curious about the images,
mm.
you then start to learn more about it, and then that's something that you're like, oh, actually, we need to care for these landscapes. And I think a lot of that comes out of the understanding of like the human interaction with these places and that we're a part of nature itself. Um, and so it's part of our responsibility to, steward these landscapes.
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking about, the audience now, and I'm wondering, you kind of got these ideas around you're trying to, protect and preserve and educate and all of these
Mm.
kinds of things. What's been your process? Maybe it's a big question, but what's kind of been your process to get to this point with what you're doing with your art? The evolution, let's say. You mentioned before about there was times perhaps when you did
Yeah.
more self-expression rather than expression of place. And
Hmm.
yeah, just let's just hear a little bit about the evolution, just for the sake of maybe the audience trying to evolve.
I think I got to a point where I had spent probably about 2 years photographing Scotland and sort of loosely put together a project which I called Solitude, which is when I was saying, seeing a lot of the same themes reflected in my own process. I was thinking back to that work and doing a lot of sort of long exposure black and white work, trying to find that solitude
Hmm.
and peace out in the landscape. And I got to the point where I was like happy with just being that person and not necessarily needing to tell everybody else this is who
Yeah,
I am.
yeah.
Uh, and rather using those, I think it's still embedded in the work, but it's not necessarily the story of the work, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Sure.
So there is a marriage between those two things where like I wouldn't be able to necessarily uh, tell these stories with the sort of level of empathy that I'm trying to tell them with
Right.
if I didn't have the background of all the sort of self-expression that I'd done previously.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting, like thinking, reflecting upon two photographic journeys there, with yours and mine. Mine, I mean, I picked up the camera for the first time back in 2018 now. And it seems interesting that perhaps there's been a similar kind of journey shared between the two of us in
Yeah,
that,
for sure.
certainly over the past, well, I mean, in some ways, my whole journey has been about introspection and learning about who I am through with the camera being the vehicle. And sounds like you went on a similar journey. So it's just really fascinating to think about these kind of shared concepts and ideas, and also then bringing it together, and hence, we're linking up now as maybe offering a collective experience based upon our own individual experience. So yeah,
Mhm.
quite interesting. So you've got some more pictures there. Let's hear a little bit.
Well, this is the latest project, which I know I've talked to you about
Yeah,
previously, Brad, but
yeah.
basically this is an ongoing project. And so I wanted to share a few of these images. There was two winter outings that I had. This was one of the winter outings that sort of like we were talking earlier about the spark of a project and how you follow your intuition.
Mm,
And these two particular winter outings were really what cemented this project idea in my mind.
mm,
Um, and yeah, seeing these particular landscapes in Torridon in Scotland, which I had visited countless times before, but I'd never seen them in these kinds of
mm.
conditions,
Yeah.
it really made the trees such an important part of the landscape
Mm,
and then made me realize how important they were. And I was like, why aren't there more trees here? Basically, that was the question that I was asking myself. And that's led to a whole host of, other introspective questions to do with our impact on the landscape and all those sorts of things, which I won't get too deep into here. But again, working with those image pairings and uh, I mean, the title of the image on the right, The Heavy Weight of Burden, I think that potentially clues viewers into the sort of themes that I'm trying to explore here. So, I mean, yeah, just incredible conditions, but it
right.
was seeing these, again, these places of reverence for me, these like really
Mm,
sacred places um, that just like elevated them to a whole new level.
mm.
And then I think that is that the last image? One more, which was just to show potentially the first iteration of how I'm sharing this project with people, which was in
Right.
a journal, sort of online magazine.
Yeah, I was going to say just talk a little bit more about this because yeah, we might end up getting some viewers that aren't familiar with this.
Yeah, so this was something that I started with a friend, Nick Becker, and essentially we wanted to give a home to some of our more, uh, what's the right word for it? Well, our more philosophical musings,
Yeah.
things that maybe would have ended up as a blog post, but weren't necessarily going to go into some of the more mainstream magazines or journals. And so, really, volume one, which is themed intersections, it's about the intersection of poetry and images. And so, the idea here is to collaborate with interesting people who have got poetic themes in their work, and to start exploring some of those ideas in a place. And it's we've had so much really really good feedback about this.
Really?
It was
Yeah.
just something that we were like, yeah, it's kind of a cool idea. These are, we're going to post these as blog posts anyway. We might as well just put them into something that looks quite nice and give them a proper home. And yeah, the support's been great, and we've had a lot of people reach out and are wanting to contribute and all sorts of
No
things.
way. Oh
And
man, that's awesome.
we're like, whoa, guys, slow down.
Yeah. Oh, well, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, hopefully we'll get you on there
Yeah, yeah, you
shortly.
mentioned yeah, I'm keen to contribute in whatever way I can. I already kind of following our conversation when you mentioned it, I already thought over to a poem that might kind of work well with
Nice.
some of what I've done so far. So yeah, we'll probably explore a little bit further. But I really love this idea of turning, like, I guess repurposing what was already there into something. It's a little bit
Yeah.
more. I mean, it's different. It's unique, isn't it? It's not so. disposable and instant, but it's,
Mm.
you know, landing in a different way with people via their email inbox. Yeah,
It's free to download from my website. Yeah.
there we go.
Don't
So,
even you don't even have to sign up for a newsletter or anything. It's
no
just
way. Great
it's a one
idea.
click. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to link that into the description as well. And I'm yeah just curious. Do you have like ideas for developing this in the future? Is it something you just go in with, like walking on the way and seeing what happens?
Yeah, it's something that we're just open to exploring at the moment. It was just an idea that one of those ideas where you're like, okay, we got to do this, and then we'll see what
Yeah.
it turns into down the road. Nick and I are going to have a call at some point and do a bit of a debrief and see what volume two is going to look like in the future. But I mean,
Nice.
the main point of bringing this up was just to say that, you know, there's so many different ways of presenting your work. And we've shared a number of those different ways, whether that's in a zine or a book or something that's online that doesn't necessarily cost you anything to produce. But it is just a case of like, if you've got an idea, then yeah, go and follow that and chase that idea down.
Yeah. I really value that. And again, we're only limited by our own limitations, our own beliefs, aren't we? There's
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
countless ways to present things, and that kind of leads me on to. I mean, I've been using Substack recently to write and to share my writings and photography. So I'm just going to quickly share that. I mean, very quickly. Let me just. How do I? There we go. So Substack, yeah, and I mean, I've been having fun, kind of just sharing impulsive little thoughts about photography, but
Mm,
also curating my thoughts and ideas into words that are intersected then with photography. I mean, a very similar way to how a blog post would be, um,
yeah.
but like curating little collections of photographs that also share themes and concepts.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and then this has been kind of working really well for me recently. I've been enjoying this platform. Um, and there's also, I mean, I've been sharing little bits of kind of practical insights via my blogs as
Yeah.
well, via Substack and on my website too. So maybe if people are looking for some further content about, this idea of themes and portfolios, I actually have a blog post all about that, which I'll leave down in the description as well, which builds upon much of what we've talked about and might offer a little bit of a different angle. Maybe people like to read and digest things in that way as well. So, yeah, any kind of thoughts following on from that from that, Murray?
Just, I think both of us are very much interested in these sort of slower, more meaningful ways of expression, but also sharing with other people, um, and the experiences that go along with those. We mentioned our workshop coming up. Um, Very much not about these like, run and gun and quick posts on social media and trying to, go viral and all that sort of stuff. Um, and I think that reflects in the style of work we make, how we make it, all the way through. So that's probably what my sort of like closing point is, just finding the way that suits you the best and the way that you like to be in the world, and
Yeah,
reflect that in how you share your photography.
yeah, that's beautiful closing thoughts, and that leads me on to something that I put out earlier. I think it was on Threads about the beauty is in who we get to be in the world, not in
Yeah,
what we create. Um, and yeah, I feel like this conversation has been really, really an interesting kind of insight into who we are, and perhaps reflects that more thoughtful and introspective approach. So, yeah, I really value
yeah.
your your mirroring of my thoughts, and
It's been a great chat.
hopefully people have taken
Really
something
enjoyed it.
from it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you're listening and watching, then like I said in the middle, please leave us some feedback, drop some comments in below with anything that has come to mind. even thoughts of your own and things that have worked for you. If you're listening with a bit of experience in this side of things, then we'd love to be students as well and learn from you. So please, the comment section is open. And yeah, I think we'll call it a day there. All of the links are in the description, and we'll be looking forward, hopefully, to seeing some of you in the future on the portfolio review, and maybe even in Scotland, which would be
Yeah,
awesome. Great.
cool.
Thanks, Murray.